the Mafia, the family, Cosa Nostra. When we think Mafia, or really organized crime, we think Sopranos, Goodfellas, all three Godfather movies, and the Italian community at large in America. It is a very, very common Hollywood trope, video game trope. I mean, when we think of organized crime, we think of the Mafia. Mafia literally being an Italian word. So much so that we refer to other ethnic organized crime rings as mafias. What if I told you that the largest, most important mafia of American history wasn't a mafia at all? It wasn't Italian. See, it's rarely touched upon. It's a topic that has largely been avoided by Hollywood and media at large, but there was a significant Yiddish mafia in America, involved in all the same activities as the Italian mafia, actually many times working alongside the Italian mafia, like most famously in Murder, Inc., the largest collaboration between the Yiddish mafia and the Italian mafia. And it makes sense. I mean, most American ethnic communities had organized crime outfits. The Irish, the Italians. It makes sense as a minority community to take advantage of sort of the insular nature of an immigrant identity for monetary gain. I'm not knocking them for that. But what is very specifically interesting about the Yiddish Mafia is the intersection between America, Israel, and this illustrious mob. Because many people don't realize that those three things are deeply, deeply connected. A show like Boardwalk Empire actually did a fairly okay job showcasing the influence of the Yiddish Mafia, but didn't get nearly as in-depth as they could have. And that's what I would like to do today. Now, I don't peddle in conspiracies on this channel. I tend to avoid it, and God knows many of my detractors would only hope that I would peddle conspiracy and not get involved in factual, provable information. So I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm not going to make any claims that are subjective. I'm just going to speak very clearly from known history. Now, it should be noted that a figure like Jeffrey Epstein in recent times, who was, objectively, deeply involved with our politics, it is still presumptive to say that he was working on behalf of a foreign actor. We have to contend with that. Now, my personal beliefs or personal theories on the matter completely aside here, we do know that there existed an information collection happening on his island and in all of his infamous exploits. We do know, called the Epstein Files for a reason, and there's a lot of them. And so it's not peddling conspiracy to say that yes, there clearly was a level of information gathering. Who actually utilized that information, I do not know, and I can't confirm a statement on that. But what I can do is confirm intelligence gathering. What I can do is confirm information gathering and who would go on to use it in history. See, because before Epstein, there was Lansky, as in Meyer Lansky, the Russian-born Yiddish mafia member who would go on to become one of the most prolific mobsters in American history, who would play a central role in the national crime syndicate during the Prohibition era, and would play a key, central role in the construction of the State of Israel. I could speak about him, because history is definitive on him. And so today, we're not going to be talking about Cosa Nostra. Rather, today, folks, we're talking kosher Nostra. Folks, welcome back to The Narrative with me, your host, Will Sexton, the host with the most and the most shady funding. Folks, interesting story for us today. Obviously, Epstein is a topic that everyone is interested in, both the politically engaged and really just the normal American citizen. We like to imagine the horrid and scandalous lives of those in power, of the rich and powerful in our society. And this has been common throughout history. Intrigue, intelligence, foreign actors, I mean, all sorts. Juicy red meat parts ripe for conspiracy. People love to talk about this stuff and always have. And I'm glad that a conversation around this is spawning. It should spawn. I think we all know that. I mean, people like a Tucker Carlson, like a Candace Owens, like Nick Fuentes, even on the left, people like Hasan Piker, or my beautiful, beautiful beloved Anna Kasparian. Still waiting for her to call back. It seems that everybody, regardless of political affiliation, is enamored with the idea of finding the truth behind something like Epstein. But what I find interesting is that no one has commented on the history, on the historical Epstein. See, because there's not a lot of speculation. We know everything. We know just about everything about his life and times and everything that he did and why he did it. I have a theory as to why we don't hear about it. It's because once you understand Meyer Lansky's life and understand Meyer Lansky's actions and exploits, you immediately begin to understand Epstein and immediately begin to understand that, yes, we've seen this before. And so today I wanted to cover the life and times of one Meyer Lansky and show you guys that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Before we get into all that, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified whenever I make a new post. And so this entire story starts way, way back at the beginning of Prohibition and an influx of new Americans. Born Meyer Sucheljansky. I'm not even going to try and get into that. He later changed his name to Meyer Lansky, which I'm actually quite grateful that he did. Was born in the Russian Empire, quickly immigrating in his youth to the United States with both of his parents. From the 1910s to the early 1920s, he lives the life of the average American immigrant story. Lower East Side Manhattan, tough streets, not a lot of food or money to go around. The typical story that you hear from this era. It was around this time, however, that he would take an interest in both business and illicit business. By the 1920s, he had met his friend and lifelong collaborator, one Bugsy Siegel, and they soon formed the Bugsy and Meyer Mob, a small-time petty crime mob to make extra cash and make ends meet. However, it was around this time that he would meet an older gentleman, one Arnold Rothstein. Now, Arnold Rothstein was a proper, true-to-form mobster who took an interest in finding the criminals of his community, of his ethnic community, of Jewish immigrants, and organizing them into a proper organized crime force. Really, he can be credited with putting together the Jewish Mafia. And shortly following this, everything changes with the start of Prohibition. Now, I've touched on this before. Prohibition was the start of basically all organized crime in this country. Obviously, crime has existed in this country since its inception. It's why we have laws, after all. But organized crime really can be credited as being formed by Arnold Rothstein, who came up with what we now know as the Mafia structure, that being the corporation-style structure. It was actually his work that would later be reverse-engineered to create the RICO Act, the law that would eventually go on to take down all of these mafias. Prohibition was the start of their power. This is because Prohibition brought crime to the average American. The average American wanted to drink. Taking booze away from Americans is kind of a hard sell, and this is a time in which we're bringing in a lot of immigrants, so they are especially going to want to drink. And so smuggling became a very profitable enterprise, and the people who were the best at smuggling were people who were organized. So they're committing a crime, and they need to be organized. It's the perfect place for organized crime. People don't realize that, like I said, the Jewish Mafia was instrumental role in Prohibition bootlegging, this is where they built all of their wealth. And Meyer Lansky proved himself to be not only a trusted mobster, but especially good with finance. He actually has earned himself now the title of the mob's accountant, something that would become very, very important as the Bugsy and Meyer mob became a lot more than just petty crime. I'm speaking, of course, about their introduction into Murder, Inc. Now, Murder, Inc. was just the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate, this big collaboration between the Jewish and Italian mafia. But Murder, Inc. specifically was known for their ability to send and utilize murder contracts. What they would do is mob bosses and different criminals would bring them hit requests, and then they would find hitmen to do the job. This was Meyer Lansky's bread and butter, was his ability to be in touch with contract killers, ex-military, etc. This would go on to become the most deadly organized crime outfit of this era. And moreover, it would go on to be one of the most well-connected operating contracts really all over the world. It's from there that I want to take this story away from Goodfellas and into the Golan Heights. So now, people don't know is that Meyer Lansky was a deeply, deeply political man, noted by all of his colleagues as a fierce and avid Zionist as early as his childhood. Mind you, he's born around the time in which Zionism is becoming a real political reality. By the time he's in his 20s, the British Mandate is in effect and a Jewish state is being drawn up. The first Aliyahs had already occurred, so Zionism has become a real and contemplated political reality within the West. He's also a young man and an international criminal during the lead up into World War II, so he is incredibly interested in the politics of Europe. Once World War II actually kicked off, he'd become a mainstay player with our government, taking a key role in Operation Underworld. See, this is because at the time, Mafia was ruled by unions. A movie like The Irishman does an explicitly good job of showing this off. And things like docks, ports, those are union gig places. And so the Mafia is basically running all of our ports at that time in America. And the US Navy, rather than attempting to take over the docks from the Mafia, they realized it was a lot easier just to pay off the Mafia and to work with them. They already had intelligence gathering, they already knew everybody, and they were already armed and could provide security. So the US government launches Operation Underworld, where we started working with the Mafia. Lansky took a very, very specific and key interest in this program, something that would play a key role in what I'm about to explain to you. See, all of this is publicly known. It's not widely known, but it's publicly known. This part, however, is largely unknown. People don't realize is that Lansky was foundational to the founding of Israel. Not only that, he played a major role in the founding of both the CIA and Mossad, two largest intelligence agencies in the world. It sounds crazy, but there's been a well-documented inroad between intelligence agencies and organized crime. It makes sense. They both kind of operate in the underworld, and Lansky played a big role in establishing that connection. This is because all of this is leading up to his exploits in the Blue Suite. From the late 1930s all the way to the early 1950s, Meyer Lansky operated something called the Blue Suite, or Suite 233 in the Manhattan Plaza Hotel. Lansky, alongside his close associates Louis Rosenstiel and Roy Cohn, would host private parties in the Plaza Hotel. Mind you, Plaza Hotel at this time is a swanky place to be. And the people that would attend these parties were the swankiest of our society. Think actors, musicians, public figures, and politicians. Most notably people like J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI national director at the time. But see, these parties, they weren't exactly family friendly, or even really adult friendly, to say the least. See, these parties were, well, we can say that Diddy didn't get it from nowhere. What Meyer Lansky would do alongside his associates is they would hire gay prostitutes. Yes, I know, stay with me now. I know it's gonna sound a little crazy, but what they would do is they would hire gay prostitutes and then would invite very, very powerful men into the suite. And as the night went on, people got drunk. You see where I'm going with this? What they would do is they would capture them on camera, being, well, free-spirited, if you will. Mind you, this is at a time in the country in which, like, being gay is illegal, and the public certainly wasn't holding pride parades. Okay, look, this is the time in the country in which people are deeply religious, and just, like, homosexuality is not accepted in American society as it is today. And so, if you're a politician or, like, political figure, and you get caught on camera, you know, living your true self, it's done for you. Not only are you losing your career, you're going to jail. You could be chemically castrated in some states. Eyewitness accounts from Lewis's ex-wife, Susan Rosenstiel, says that she saw Edgar Hoover in the Blue Suite on several occasions, dressed in drag, going by the name Mary, and parading around with several young male prostitutes. I mean, I try to keep this channel relatively, you know, like we don't gotta get into the nitty gritty, but you can gather what was happening here. This is largely what historians believe led J. Edgar Hoover to not go after the mob at all. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, okay, they got blackmail on the guy and they're utilizing it for their political aims, but that's not necessarily that crazy. After all, he is a mobster. Like maybe they're just gathering that blackmail for their American mobster activities. I mean, having the FBI director turn a blind eye to crime in America, that's a very powerful thing to have. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter his ethnic origins, doesn't really matter his political affiliations. It's just American criminals being American criminals. However, I wish that were the case. In the early 1940s, Meyer Lansky is a very, very staunch supporter of the State of Israel. He very famously sends a $25,000 check to the Zionist American League for a Free Palestine, which don't get tripped up by that name. So I know that when you hear the phrase Free Palestine, you're thinking the other side, but at the time, actually, Free Palestine meant a Free Palestine for the Zionists, like free so that they could set up Israel. I know it's confusing, but they're on the Israel side. I know, a little confusing. However, he sends this check during the U.S. arms embargo to Israel, to the region. It's around this time that he's contacted through colleagues by one Yehuda Arazi, an emissary for Haganah. Now, the Haganah, this is the IDF before the IDF. Actually, the IDF logo is from the Haganah logo. Haganah means in Hebrew defense. It was basically a paramilitary organization founded in Jewish settlements in Palestine, both Ottoman Palestine and British Palestine, and then once Israel was formed, they would become the official military. He's contacted by Yehuda, who is in need of arms. They need arms to engage in a removal of Arabs from the region. At this time, people like Yehuda are planning an event that would later go on to be called the Nakba, the official and definitive removal and expulsion of Arabs from the region to make way for mass waves of Jewish settlement in the new state of Israel. Now, Yehuda was aware that the Mafia was in control of the docks in America. Because of Lansky's basically control over the FBI via J. Edgar Hoover, he was able to divert boats to the region and have longshoremen fill them with weapons. Weapons at the time that are being funneled from Italy. This is basically where the early arms racket of Israel begins. Basically, the Italian mobsters are bringing guns from Italy, which has now been liberated by Allied forces, and so now there's an excess of guns into America, and then Meyer Lansky is putting them on ships and sending them to the region, and thus arming the Haganah. It was Meyer Lansky himself who completely armed and basically funded the early Haganah, all of which is being powered by the blackmail that he had on FBI figures, on law enforcement figures that allowed for him to sort of operate without the ire of the government. Now, that alone is pretty definitively bad, that the State of Israel, we can literally say, was founded via blackmail. And if you want more specifically on that topic, there's a great book called One Nation Under Blackmail. I love that book. Very, very underrated and very, very well sourced. It is a great book. The connection continues a little bit further into the world of intelligence. See, Meyer Lansky played a key role in the Brecha movement, Brecha being Hebrew for escape or flight. This was the movement of Jewish refugees from World War II into Palestine. This is how the vast majority of what would become the Israelis, the Ashkenazi Israelis, got there. Now see, Meyer Lansky, he played a big role in that. Mind you, I just told you, he's shipping things all around the Mediterranean. He's getting guns from Italy, bringing them to America, and then going into Palestine. He's moving around all over the Mediterranean, basically. It's at this time that his work begins to overlap with the work of a small, newly formed American agency called the CIA. People don't know, and this is all, again, well noted and well documented, that the Brecha movement played a very, very big role with the CIA. This is because once World War II ended, the Cold War, immediately began. And mind you, up until that point, the Soviet Union was living behind the Iron Curtain. We didn't know anything about what was going on in the Soviet Union, and this is before the internet. This is really before mass communication like that across the Atlantic Ocean. It wasn't possible, so we didn't know anything about what was happening, what their government was capable of, how big it was. And so the Central Intelligence Agency was looking for intelligence. And what better way to get intelligence on the Soviet Union than to talk to people who are now fleeing the area that would become the Soviet Union? A huge part of the Brecha movement is the CIA would basically tap people coming through this network of ships. They would tap a Jewish refugee and say, hey, you lived in the Soviet Union and did XYZ. Maybe you were an engineer or you worked with the government or the military or what have you. Can you give us information on the Soviet Union and what's going on over there? Meyer Lansky played a key role in that. His ships were being utilized in that. Many times, the very same people that were tapped would then go on to be part of the Haganah, the organization that Meyer Lansky armed. And wouldn't you know it, all of the emissaries of Bricha, the movement, were from the Haganah. So the Haganah, their recruitment method was helping people get out of Europe and into the region. This is how they were able to build up their numbers. All of this was called Project Symphony in 1946 and was launched specifically to infiltrate the Bricha movement and to get this information on the Soviet Union. It was from this that several interesting stories would spawn, but all of those are later videos. What I want to do now is summarize what this means for us today. Meyer Lansky would go on to be fully acquitted of all crimes in America upon returning, something that historians believe is because of his ties to the CIA, that he helped out all across World War II and then all across the Bricha movement, that the government was basically like, okay, we're going to forgive you for any crimes that you did. He retires in Miami Beach, Florida, and that's the end of his story. He dies of natural causes at age 80. However, all of this leads into greater questions about what would go on later, what happens today with Epstein. See, because this story sets historical precedent that yes, intelligence agencies, individual actors, organized crime, all these different shady underworld things, they've engaged in blackmail before. It's well known that Washington is full of and driven by a lot of blackmail. That's not really a conspiratorial claim, but what is interesting is how often this one state and this one political interest becomes indicted in these networks, because Meyer Lansky was never granted Israeli citizenship. He lived there for a very short period of time while fleeing tax evasion charges, but returned to the States when he was acquitted. So, this isn't a guy who was an Israeli, and yet he did all of this and put his life on the line for all this, which goes to show that there are intelligence actors who are operating between borders, and that this state is benefiting from it directly, that the state's power largely comes from a grander network rather than its own power in the Middle East. Once you note that, all of a sudden things like Epstein, now that begins to have much larger implications about how and why he was so important in American politics. But those are all stories for another day. And truthfully, maybe another platform, because you gotta be a little unfiltered for that. But until then, we have the true, factual, and deeply concerning story of Meyer Lansky, one that we can all learn from and utilize to look at modern politics through a very specific lens. But if you're not into all that, there's always The Sopranos. Folks, that is going to do it for us today on this episode of The Narrative. I hope you enjoyed. Crazy stuff. One of my more interesting episodes. I really hope you people watch this because it's interesting stuff. And like I said, One Nation Under Blackmail, I absolutely recommend reading it if you're into that kind of thing. Goes way more in depth, it's way more intellectual than I could ever be, and has far more sources than I could ever find on my own. Absolutely a great book, and I reference it a lot throughout this video. With all being said, folks, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified whenever I make a new post. Be sure to follow me on Kick and Rumble. I've said it before, I would love to start doing some more sort of unfiltered streams with you guys. I stream here Tuesdays, Thursdays, as well as weekends, but I'd love to be a little more unfiltered with you guys, so please be sure to follow on Kick. And let me know down below what you think of this video. Was this typical organized crime activity or something more? Let me know down below. But folks, with all of that out of the way, as I always say, God bless you and God bless America.